Hello and welcome to A Genteel Black Hole, the home of my bookish rambles. My name's Ali, and what is time? Well, it's the Merineum. That's the kind of awkward space between Christmas and New Year. And it's that time of year when I find myself both looking back and forward. Of course, I'm kind of always doing that. I am depressed and anxious. But, at least the calendar year gives it some structure. So I thought I would have a chat about the trends that I've noticed in my reading during 2024 and also about my hopes for 2025. I'll also share how much I've read from this year's TBR lists and show you my list for the coming year. My reading habits have shifted a bit this year. For one thing, I read far fewer books. I finished 83 last year, while I'm in the mid-50s as this year comes to a close. That's partly because I read a few chonkers that took several weeks to finish, which decreases the overall number of books. Also, I have pretty much completely stopped listening to audiobooks or reading ebooks on my phone at bedtime. I think that's partly down to running this channel. I won't just sleepwalk through a story anymore. I feel like I've got to give my take on everything that I read. That encourages me to be a more alert, more attentive reader, which is great. I really value that. But it does mean that bedtime reading no longer feels like a relaxing activity. So I've mostly switched to podcasts and radio comedy to help me get to sleep at night. My genre preferences have also changed quite dramatically this year, actually. Sci-fi was traditionally one of my reliable go-to genres, but this year I seem to have completely fallen out of love with it. In 2023, I finished a whopping 28 sci-fi books, by far my most read genre. But this year, while I've read about the same number of fantasy and murder mysteries as usual, the number of sci-fi books has dropped to just 2, and I didn't really like either of those. I've also kind of drifted away from a rewatch of Doctor Who and going through the modern Star Trek shows, so this trend is not isolated to my reading. I can't put my finger on why I've fallen out of love with sci-fi, but yeah, I have. Instead, I've been drawn to more classic novels and more plays. As well as my usual Shakespeare plays, I've tried novels by E.M. Forster, Elizabeth von Arnim, Nella Larsen, Hans Fallada, and plays by Anton Chekhov and Henrik Ibsen. Some I've loved. I'm especially excited for more Forster and more Ibsen. Others, like Chekhov, felt maybe a bit more like hard work, but still rewarding, and yeah, I'm still interested in trying more of that too. And I also continue to read a relatively small number of non-fiction books, which once again ended up being some of my favourites of the year. Maybe eventually I'll take the hint that I should read even more non-fiction. Back in 2023, I started making annual TBR lists, sorted into various categories. These lists aren't goals. I don't have to read these books, and it doesn't matter how many I do read by the end of the year. It's not a challenge. It's just a way to keep track of the books that I'm most excited about going into the year and what series I have in progress. In fact, one of the first videos I made on this channel was tracking my progress on the 2023 list and sharing my 2024 list. So let's continue the tradition and see how I did this year. The first section was likely reads. These were books that I felt pretty confident I would get around to. They're not parts of series, unless they're the first books in series that I've not read before. And they're also not big, daunting tomes. There's some trusty Agatha Christie, some Arthur C. Clarke, Connie Willis, as well as E.M. Forster, and the first entries in the Rivers of London and Brother Cadfael series. And as you can see from the colour coding, in the end I read 11, DNF'd 1, and left the other 13 unread. Sci-fi, as you may have already guessed, didn't fare well at all. I had been quite intrigued about Hyperion, but I just couldn't get into it. And yeah, most of the other sci-fi books remain untouched. Next are some books I wanted to reread. A Month in the Country and Chess were both still wonderful, but Piranesi was a little disappointing the second time around, and Solaris was a real slog. And I didn't make it very far with The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie before DNFing. Just wasn't in the mood for that. A few of the books I didn't get around to will be carried over to next year's list. I only read 3 of my non-fiction picks, not including the things that weren't on the list, but this is just the TBR list. John Berger's Ways of Seeing was interesting, though not quite as mind-blowing as I'd been led to believe. But Judi Dench's Shakespeare-centric memoir was an utter delight. And again, a few of these unread books will be carried over to next year. Next is the list of big daunting books. These are books that I was interested in trying, but I found them hard to approach for whatever reason. And yeah, I only managed those 2 Shakespeare plays. However, I do have a plan to help me tackle some of these big books next year, so more on that later. Next is the list of series continuations. I've been going through Poirot from the beginning, including rereading the ones I'd already read, but I've kind of stalled on that. Death in the Clouds was not very good, and I feel like I've read the ABC Murders too recently to want to reread it. Maybe next year I'll skip that and go straight ahead with Murder in Mesopotamia. I only added Cadfael in the middle of the year, having already read the first 4 at the start of the year, so that's why this list starts from book 5. I also reread Tinker Tailor as part of my John le Carre project, and finished off Robin Hobb's Farseer trilogy, and just one Earthsea book this year, partly because I know that The Farthest Shore is my least favourite of the series, so I keep putting off rereading it. Anyway, once again, some of this will get carried over to next year. And perhaps the list with the most green is my reread of Discworld in full series order. I did admittedly skip Interesting Times because, again, I know it's one of my least favourites. And, I mean, Discworld is mostly episodic, so it's easy enough to skip a book here and there. I have been continuing to enjoy revisiting Discworld, and Pratchett remains probably my favourite author, but I do plan to space the books out a little bit more next year to make sure that I'm really eager to read each book before I pick it up. I don't want to end up reading Pratchett, just out of habit and lose my enthusiasm for him. So, what are my plans for the coming year? For starters, I have decided not to do a Goodreads goal. I've set goals for the last 5 years in a row, and I've always set it to a number that I knew I could reach, 42, because I am that nerd. At first, maybe it provided some helpful motivation, but now all it really does is discourage me from reading long books. Why spend a fortnight on one book when I could finish 2 or 3 instead? I don't want to think that way anymore. I just want to focus on the quality of my reading, not the number of books. Of course, I will still read short books. I like to have some variety in my reading, and a relatively fast turnover does help with that. But I don't want to be discouraged from reading long books just because of Goodreads gamification. And, as I hinted at earlier, I have a plan for tackling longer books. In fact, it's something that I've already started this month. I'll keep up with my daily reading routine, where I read for about an hour every morning, and for that I will stick mostly to shorter books. The quick turnover helps to keep up my reading momentum. Sometimes longer books can start to feel like a slog or an obligation if I'm reading them every day without fail. So, to combat that feeling, I'll read longer books in addition to my daily reading. To that end, I have started to read David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. I'm picking it up in the afternoons, every now and then, just when I have the time and the inclination. That way, I'm making the conscious decision to pick it up, not automatically out of habit. It's also a good way to coax me away from doom scrolling. When I find myself getting stressed and overstimulated from social media, I can tell myself, no, stop, read your book. So David Copperfield might take months to finish, but hopefully this approach will make sure it doesn't become a chore. And the fact that David Copperfield was originally published as a serial that lasted over 2 years means that this approach to reading is probably actually quite a fitting way to do it. So, with that in mind, I've slightly rejigged my TBR list for 2025. I have separate lists for daily reading and what I'm calling slow reading, and there's also all the usual other sections: non-fiction, series continuations, rereads. So, let's have a look, shall we? My daily reads list is looking a bit smaller this time around. I read some Chekhov and Ibsen this year, so I'm definitely keen to read more of that. And both of these plays are in the paperback collections that I already own. I'm also eager for more E.M. Forster, having loved A Room with a View and enjoyed Howard's End this year. And luckily, I actually received a copy of A Passage to India for Christmas, which happened after I'd already made this list. And of course, there's more Shakespeare as usual. This year I really enjoyed reading some plays of his that I'd never even seen before, so now I'm actually considerably less daunted by the prospect of reading some other new-to-me plays. And I've also included one John Wyndham book, just on the off chance that I recover from my current aversion to sci-fi. And here's the slow reads, the longer books that I hope to try with my new approach. I've already started David Copperfield, as I said, and after that I'm most interested probably in trying Anna Karenina. But yeah, we'll see how this works out. And we have just a handful of rereads, most of which were carried over from last year. I'm particularly interested in revisiting Christopher Isherwood's Goodbye to Berlin, which, in case you didn't know, was the basis for the musical Cabaret. The non-fiction list is also a bit streamlined. Some of these are admittedly quite daunting to me. I know that the book on Palestine will be emotionally devastating, so I can't promise I'll manage to read it, but it's an important topic that deserves a space on my reading list. There's also a new section that I'm calling Hesitant Reads. It's kind of like the big daunting list from last year, but it's not necessarily the size of these books that put me off, at least not all of them. And, you know, size is an issue that I'm trying to deal with using this new slow reading method. So, yeah, the hesitation comes from elsewhere in these cases. In some cases, they're just books that I'm not certain I'll get on with, but for one reason or another, I'm intrigued to try them anyway. I'm hesitant to read the Strugatsky brothers book simply because it's sci-fi, and I'm hesitant to read more Robin Hobb after really hating Assassin's Quest. but I have been informed that the Live Ship Traders trilogy is her best work, so maybe? And I'm hesitant to read Mrs. Dalloway because it's kind of modernist stream of consciousness stuff, and I'm just not sure I'll like it. But I do want to try Virginia Woolf, even if I am afraid. Next, we have series continuations. I've streamlined this list too. I've lost interest in some of the series that were on last year's list, like the Garth Nix thing. But there's still Poirot, Cadfael, George Smiley, and a reread of Earthsea. And finally, the Discworld list. At my current rate, I expect to go from Jingo through to Nightwatch this year. That should take me through some of my favourites, including The Fifth Elephant and The Amazing Maurice, as well as a few novels and short stories that I've never read. However, Jingo was my least favourite City Watch book when I first read it, and The Last Continent is a Rincewind book that I purposely skipped until now. So Discworld may be off to a rough start for me this year, and there's a chance I might just jump straight to Carpe Jugulum. Yeah, we'll see. So, those are my reading hopes for the year ahead. But what about you? Are you making a list and checking it twice? Will your books be naughty or nice? Are you a fan of any of the books on my list? Why not let me know in the comments? I'm always happy to hear from you. But that's about it from me today. I hope you're having a lovely holiday season, and I will see you when I see you.